Well, a pleasant good morning to all members of the Small Business Association, to our friends and partners, our colleagues, all a pleasant good day to you. And since we are still in the month of January, may I say a happy new year. Happy New Year to everyone. I hope that 2025 brings to each and every one of you the dreams and wishes that you aspire to, that this be a productive and healthy year. Happy New Year to all. We're continuing with our members' information sessions. As you know, the Small Business Association of Barbados organizes a monthly webinar to address a topic of interest, an area that we believe is of critical importance to the business community and in particular the small business sector. And we're able, through our strategic partnerships, to have what we consider a subject matter expert every month on our call to share with us on the topic of focus. And we're beginning 2025 as we concluded last year with the continuation of this webinar series. And I can assure you we are starting off with a topic that will pique your interest, Outlook 2025, the prospect for the small business sector. And as we go through the next hour, I am hopeful that we'll be able to share insights that will help you in your business operations. I'm Dr. Lynette Holder, CEO of the Small Business Association, and it's my pleasure to moderate this session for the next few moments. So if you're new to our platform, if you're new to this program, the presentation will follow immediately after the introduction of our speaker, and at the end of this presentation, we'll have a short period for questions, comments, and we ask that you jot your thoughts down. We will invite you to place your questions in the chat, and we'll have that discussion after the PowerPoint presentation. Also, at the end of our session today, we will place a link in our chat feature, inviting you to give your comments. It is to assist us as we evaluate our program. So just about 6 or 7 questions, take maybe 5 minutes of your time for you to give feedback on today's session and your interest for the future. We have an entire year ahead of us to plan, God willing, and therefore we want to get your thoughts, your feedback as we put together the various webinars on a monthly basis. So without any further ado, colleagues, we are here to look at 2025. What does this year portend for the sector? From where I sit, I see a very challenging year for the small business sector. In particular, that is my area of focus, the small business community. It is going to be a very challenging one, is my prediction. I'm not an economist. We'll hear from our economist colleagues shortly. But from what we're seeing on the ground, as the saying goes, coming out of 2024, the regulatory regime, folks, within which we have to operate is a very challenging one. And therefore, I believe that unless we can see significant improvements, this is going to continue as we closed out last year. So what is the responsibility of us all as we come together in these fora, not only to receive insights, but I'm going to be issuing a clarion call as we go through this year that we need our small business community to step up, as it were, and ensure that their voices, their concerns are brought to the fore, that we can hear you in our programming, and we can hear you in the various activities that we organize, lobbying for improvements in the business community. This is going to be a call of the association for its members and its partners as we head into this year. The governor of the central bank has recently reported as yesterday, I believe it was, that the economy again continues to grow. We need to make sure that the sector is a critical part of this and that we can feel the results and the impact of this in our operations. So those are my introductory comments, colleagues, as we start the conversation today. It is my pleasure to have with us this morning a friend of the SBA. I mean, he's been with us in so many different of our webinars addressing critical topics, and we thought there was no better person to help us with today's focus as we look at Outlook 2025, prospects for the small business community, none other than Jeremy Stephen. Now, in the event that you may not know our speaker today, Jeremy has extensive experience in private equity and economic consulting across the region and in Barbados. He's a former president of the Barbados Economics Society, and his core consulting specialities include corporate advisory, financial due diligence, economic analysis, economics of cryptocurrencies, and web and app development. He's also a FAA commercial multi-engine pilot. Just to have that on your CV is always an advantage. He's provided business advisory services to a number of agencies, regionally, internationally, and here locally. And some of them include the Food and Agricultural Organization, the Government of Barbados, the Nevis Island Administration, One Caribbean Media, to name a few. He served as the chairman of the board of COSCAP, and he's also lectured in banking and finance at the University of the West Indies right here at Cave Hill. So, as I said, without any further ado, let's invite our speaker today, Mr. Jeremy Stephen, to share his thoughts and his insights as we look at Outlook 2025, prospects for the small business sector. Over to you, Jeremy.
All right, good morning, and thank you, Dr. Holder. Actually, I have something to say to you. I found out last night, interestingly, that there's a connection between us involving Brayton, and I had no idea beforehand. So I feel
yes, I knew
a
that.
little more enthused than normal. Let me put it that way to you.
Right. All right.
And I do say thank you for having me once again, and for everybody else, a happy new year. As was said, we are in January, so I wish to extend those. This is actually a very challenging discussion because for the first time on this chat, I went through the list. A lot of people here I know, so I'll be held to high account today. Nonetheless, I'll be as truthful as I can be, and that's 100% of the time, especially professionally. And as Dr. Holder did say, you know, we have a good backdrop with respect to the central bank's presentation yesterday. It was, for all intents and purposes, a very interesting presentation. I'll say before getting into the meat of the matter, one of the primary issues that I typically have is the disconnect between the macroeconomy and a few microeconomies. In other words, the idea of a trickle-down economy. And funnily enough, as we go through today's presentation, you may very well agree that that trickling down might not have affected you, especially depending on which industry you are in. So without much further ado, we begin. Just to give us a summary of what happened last year. Interestingly, you know, this was timed to perfection with the central bank. Real GDP growth was 4%. 4% long-term in Barbados is neither here or there, but when you take COVID into consideration, it's a return to form. Nothing surprising if Barbados grows between 2.8 and 4%. It's an average year at best, especially when the average rate of inflation over time tends to be greater than that. But inflation slowed last year, and a lot of it had to do with the compact that government put forward with the private sector, asking the private sector in many cases to freeze prices, and then also going about reducing VAT, or at least the VAT liability on electricity for an extended period. And that was felt by a 1.4, or felt, and you can see it via the 1.4% inflation rate on the local side. Unemployment is a growth they always continue to have. They say that it's around 7.1%. In Barbados's case, this is almost like full employment. But considering what you see on the ground level with massive emigration out of the country, and I always try to emphasize over and over that the central bank needs to, in this environment, if you're trying to base things in reality, juxtapose or show side by side unemployment. My video's stuck, I think. I'm not sure. But yeah, the central bank needs to show unemployment figures alongside immigration figures, alongside movements in the labor force. The labor force, for definition, is always persons within working age. So definition sometimes escapes me, but typically between 16 years old and retirement age, which moves depending on when state pensions are supposed to be paid out. So it's around 65 to 67 and a half years old now. So when that moves, the unemployment rate can actually move along with it, and it's not necessary to say or correct to say that more people were employed. Maybe in this case they were. I just need to see updates to the survey by the Barbados Statistical Service before concluding that, it wasn't a case of, well, more Bajans left than normal and the rate at which people lost jobs fell by the rate that people were leaving, so the unemployment rate stayed the same, if you get me, because it's unemployment divided by labor force, the actual people working, and if the labor force falls at the same rate as the amount of people who are available to work, then, or are actually working, then one would assume that the unemployment rate can stay the same. And I have reason to suspect that had a place, because if you looked at the central bank report from yesterday, and I encourage everybody to read it, even if you don't understand, it is a reference. There's a section that was provided that says that claims made against the NIS were basically the same as last year and the year before. It kind of makes me feel as if people are dropping out the labor force, either through immigration or just having been unemployed for too long still. I'm not entirely convinced that the job market is stable just yet. International reserves have reached 31.2 weeks of import cover. When I was a very young economist, this was normally a good thing, but the majority of this is made up by debt. And as we go on, you would see that with respect to how government has been financing its operations, which is a major change, different to what I'm accustomed to over the past year, you could say that, this is neither here or there if you believe that government was financing its operations in the way that one would expect. The stars of the last year were tourism. Long stay arrivals increased by 10.7%. And I will be fair and say that according to the central bank, spend also increased, especially in line with those long stay arrivals. Cruise tourism also grew, but as we all well know, most of your spend wouldn't come from cruise. Government collects some taxes here. There's a little bit of money that trickles down to persons who are operating tours and those that benefit from those tours, and nothing much else. Yet to be convinced, although it does benefit a few, and yet to be convinced that it has that big macroeconomic performance outside of increasing taxation or tax receipts being collected. We all see the construction projects that are going on, even more recently, some roads randomly being dug up, especially up in Hackett Hall. So construction in general has grown and drove a lot of the economic growth. Wholesale and retail, as the largest direct sector in the country, it's not tourism. Tourism has a lot of indirect effects. In other words, the US dollar that comes in here because of a tourist. Video stuck again. I may need to cancel my video. All right. The US dollar that comes in through tourism tends to spread a lot more, especially through long stay arrivals. But as an industry alone, the largest contributor, and I keep trying to emphasize this, is wholesale and retail. So if you are a small business involved in that industry, you are as important in many ways as a tourism business. You keep the country afloat when tourism season and crop over is no longer around. Business and other services also increased pretty mightily. And sadly, manufacturing continues along a very worrying trend that's been around for many years of not contributing that much to growth. People still emphasize manufacturing as being very important. I've come out very honestly and said over the years it is not. But there's a few tools around, especially 3D printing, which I hope the government truly reverses its position on in the future, that could allow for specialty manufacturing that can be competitive in at least, let's say, premium markets. I might be short-sighted. And agriculture, again, underperform, and we still see that as a bedrock to our society. So our society basically continues, especially coming out of COVID, to be driven by tourism, to be driven by construction as a short-term measure. It's not sustainable, and every economist knows this, but it does give a nice kick to the economy. It does help in terms of employing underprivileged individuals, even if it is for the short while. And again, wholesale and retail. Banking is stable, international business is stable, but the major contributors are on our page right now. Just a bit of a graphical representation and a realization as to how far we've come. We are, because of the capital expenditure initiatives by government, that's what's really driving construction. It's not the UNI's building houses, it's government actually kickstarting through some loans, through some climate financing, and through its own taxation, financing in some form or measure, domestic construction of roads, different sorts of infrastructure, and a few commercial projects for commercial real estate. It's not really the case, and also financing some of the, I would say, the lower end housing schemes as well. As controversial as it may seem, a lot of that contributed to significant growth in that area. But we've come a long way. And before 2020, the economy was flagging, not much growth, if any. And construction projects were used back then to get that little above 0%. But for the last 4 years, 4 calendar years, we've returned somewhat to form at the macro level. What is always clear to me is whether that has been diluted or distilled or trickles down truthfully to small businesses that do not, let me go back, play a part in tourism, in construction, wholesale and retail. Yeah, more small businesses would be involved in that. But worse yet, agriculture and manufacturing. Does any of that benefit spread? And that is always the question. And funnily enough, over these past 4 years, especially with the cost of living having rises, or was rising at a very uncontrollable rate until recently, again, it was 1.4% last year. Most people might have definitely taken the decision to either opt out, either via emigration or just deciding to live on welfare or deciding to become part of the informal economy. And the informal economy, I mean, up to 20 years ago, it accounted, there was some estimates that the central bank were playing around with, and I got my eyes on as a young economist, of close to about 40% of truthful economic activity could be attributed to the informal sector. That's the sector that doesn't pay taxes. That's the sector that doesn't register officially for its services. That's the sector that just does criminal stuff. What the older people call hustling. And my suspicion is that a lot of people have opted to go into the informal economy, and there is a direct correlation with crime and that. So if there's more crime and the young boys walking around with more gold chains than I could ever have, and walking around with Bass Pro shop hats, which are really cheap in the States, but it's a whole thing. You're seeing certain people actually surviving, and there's nothing wrong with survival, but it signals to me that the underground or the informal economy is absorbing more people than we may be taking account for. I go no further on that. So in terms of key takeaways from last year, the government and the central bank believes that we've had sustained economic growth that outpaces what's going on globally. A bit of a misnomer or misdirect, in my opinion, because that's comparing themselves to G7 countries, and G7 countries don't grow quickly, on average 3.5%. So nothing big. You know, if it were that we were growing faster than Guyana, then yes, or faster than Jamaica, then yes. But that's not the case. In terms of the region, we're pretty much in line and midfield in terms of our recovery. Just very few countries aren't growing right now in the Caribbean: Spanish, English, Dutch, French. Well, French, not so much. All right, so the government is getting wealthier. That's what the second point is saying. There's a notable surplus a long time ago, that being 2018, the government stopped taking into consideration that, you know, we pay out of revenue salaries, and we also pay debts, down the principal of our debts and the interest of our debts. When that was being reported, it's interesting. When that was being reported, you had this whole thing about fiscal deficits floating around, but now everybody talks about the primary deficit, primary surplus, which typically does not account for whether the government is truthfully borrowing to pay loans. I'm not going to suggest that it is right now, even though it may seem that way. I'm not. Based on the data, it doesn't seem like it is, at least for last year. When I reveal what it is, then a lot of you might see why a certain piece of legislation or slash initiative is being pushed with gusto right now. But essentially, when it comes to the fiscal position, they're focusing mainly on government having revenue and then non-debt expenses primarily. So government, in other words, is making enough from its taxation to pay salaries and to lend money to state-owned, or to give money to state-owned enterprises to operate. Good position, but doesn't speak much to where or if it is able to pay down its debt long-term, as many of the debts are still very much restructured, you know, the boss bonds and all that stuff. So declining unemployment rates, they say, indicates a strengthening labor market. I challenge that. I think it needs a little more analysis. I luckily still live my life in a way, and I live in an area where I get a good pulse of what's going on, even if I don't see it. And a lot of the people who I grew up with, you know, Britain and otherwise, and Charnox and other places, I still maintain very tight relationships. So, you know, it's something that on a weekly basis I'm met with, and many politicians, I'm sure, are met with the same. I'm not saying I'm a politician, but I'm sure they've met with the same issues or aware of the same issues. So long story being short, I don't think that that positive trend is truly indicative of a strengthening labor market, but more it implies immigration and opting out of the formal economy even more. That is my belief based on what I see, and also what certain numbers that I mentioned earlier indicate. The challenges, however, remain true. Barbados remains vulnerable to all of these wars about the place. It remains vulnerable to Trump. You see how everybody is up in arms with the so-called 150. A lawyer friend of mine telling me is more than that, 151 persons that are supposed to be deported by ICE back to Barbados. What are we going to do to integrate those persons back into society? Who will take the charge if they're near full employment logically? As I said earlier, 7.1 assumes that almost everybody has a job. And if you have that situation, then how do you take in 151 people? Just for emphasis, that's like a zero, let me tell you now. Yeah, a 0.1% increase in the labor force, just from having those persons, if they are of working age, coming back into the country. So how do you absorb that? Maybe it's insignificant, who knows? Do they go into the underground economy here? Do they cause issues? Does violence actually uptick in line with these people coming back home and not being absorbed appropriately? We are all exposed, is the point. So tourism is in line with or any issues pertaining to our vulnerabilities can be exposed through tourism by people not looking to travel next year because the war in Ukraine has started to spread. There's indications that that could happen. And then our agricultural vulnerabilities based on imports and also based on climate. You know, last year was bad when it comes to weather, and who knows what's going to happen this year. All indications says it may be a repeat of last year. But the emphasis on diversification, which is the next point, is something that people have been calling for years, but you know, the political will seems to always go back into tourism. And given the data that we just had, it would be stupid if government is rational for government to decide to take any risks outside of tourism right now. Like if you are a rational government, logical government, and the proof was that with a few more dollars in marketing and you were able to offset the cost for tourists to come in from the States, you're getting more American tourists than ever, it seems. There's money being spent there is yielding immediate return. The risk is not as big because you're an established player in that space in tourism, especially high-end tourism. Why then begin to support manufacturing, for example? So you may get some kind of, I guess, what's the word? I might just pay some words to manufacturing going forward, but if the government is rational, I don't see in the short term any overarching support going towards kicking up or increasing manufacturing activity. In my opinion, it seems to be dying a slow death, right? So going back, going ahead. So just the outlook now. Long term, or at least for next year, the government is expecting, or the governor of the central bank is expecting a repeat performance. But inflation is going to tick up a bit as some of the initiatives that government had with the tripartite, the private sector rolls back, especially where it concerns the electricity costs. If, you know, the shock in terms of the price of oil it starts to tick up again, especially next year, God knows, because, you know, the price of oil rises with the threat of war. Imagine with actual war, what happens with the price of oil. So next year, inflation could very well beat the 2% on the backdrop of, let's say, no resolution of any kind of war at all, especially in the Middle East, where it's beginning to pick up again, and in Europe. Suffice to say, with a lot of the far-right movements that are taking power, there's going to be inextricably an increase in the price of oil. Although with Trump, that may stabilize, given that he wants to increase production in the US and force the Saudis' hands. You know, he's trying to convince them to invest more outside of oil, especially in the US, tying those economies together. So you may not get the wild swings, these huge swings in oil prices, especially on the increasing end going forward. But given the looming threat of war, 2% is being generous. It could be greater. The government also is very, and mark this in the back of your head, obsessed with getting debt below 100% of GDP in a year's time. Right now, we're just slightly above. It would mean that every government policy that goes forward is going to target that. The currency is safe because we've got 31 weeks of imports. To measure how safe the 2-to-1 ratio is, you just need to look at the weeks of imports. And if the weeks of imports are trending down fast, it means the currency is under threat. So in other words, they're not going to go their way to, as a primary concern, protect the currency, which normally means price of imports go up and all that. But when it comes to debt reduction, they're going to look more at efficiency and cash flow initiatives. They're not looking at making more money for the sake of making money, but rather having cash on hand that should a call on debt, particularly next year, and there's a major one, or in a few years' time, that they have enough cash available to either convince other investors to pay on their behalf and then use the cash as a form of security, typical bond market stuff, or they pay it down themselves because they've been having cash. The potential risk, again, to the government and the economy next year actually performing in the way that the central bank expects is pretty self-evident. global slowdowns, if there's any, they may be all depending on war, climate-related disruptions. God forbid another barrel happens, because that effectively wiped out the agricultural sector and fisheries. And again, geopolitical tensions. It's all self-evident. Nothing I'm saying here is something that you don't know or haven't thought about before, I'm sure. So they're expecting, well, 3%. It stabilizes in that 3% region for at least 3 years, then returning to 4% in around 2029, 2030. But I'm going to give you a very quick economics class. And maybe once the video returns. All right, great. I'm going to give you a economics class right now. A lot of these models, especially when it comes to projection models, is based on past data. It's not based on new supposed information. In other words, there's nobody right now sitting down in the central bank. There's nobody sitting down at my house right now. There's nobody sitting down at the airport that can tell you with 100% accuracy what major events that could affect the Barbados economy could occur in 2029. So the safest bet is always to say, let's look at past performance and add a multiple to it, while realizing that it may shift below this expectation or above. Every forecast is done this way. Typically, it's something called an autoregressive process. There are other forms, more advanced forms, but I would be highly surprised if this GDP growth that they're talking about here wasn't done using autoregressive processes. I could be wrong. It used to be done that way. It might have changed. But it says or suggests to me when I looked over the graphs at the central bank that a lot of it is based on past information. I just realized that Heather's otter.ai is not taking my notes any longer. Heather, I hope you're not sharing this with the media. I don't know. You should probably get permission from the SBA. All right. So what everybody is here for? What does all of this mean for me? Well, given that small businesses make up the multitude of any firm, any type of firm in the English-speaking Caribbean, and providing 60% of jobs, it means that a lot of those impacts, those economic impacts that we discussed just now, bear on you, especially depending on whether a government in small open economy like Barbados seeks to protect your interests versus seeking to protect larger interests. Believe it or not, both can't happen at the same time. A lot of us that like to believe that trickle-down economics is a helpful thing, believe that you take care of the big, the small survive. It never works out that way, particularly as businesses, large businesses, just as small businesses seek profit, and therefore awfully tend to compete with one another. So the spread doesn't tend to happen. But given that there are other challenges, just based on the fact that you don't have the capacity or the skill to overcome a lot of them, what I'm about to discuss, you have to now add on top of the challenges that I discussed at the macro level. So the fact is you can't walk into Scotiabank and borrow your way out of, let's say, a flagging economy. The fact is that it's a little more difficult, especially when it comes to capitalization. In other words, having the money sorry, once the video comes again. Right, having the money to go after economic opportunities outside of Barbados and especially CARICOM, unless you are more like a digital nomad, where most of your work is done via computer, you know that there's very high cost for that type of expansion, and it's tied inextricably to your limited ability to get back financing. Of course, all of that is tied in on the export side to regulatory burdens. But believe it or not, depending on the industry you're in, especially if you're innovating and looking at having patents done and whatnot, it exists the issue of complex registrations. Even incorporating nowadays is a much larger headache than it needs to be. And Barbados would have had before 2018, 2019, this initiative of trying its best to reduce or to increase the ease of doing business in the country. And it feels as though that's taken a back burner almost while government tries to become more efficient with its cash flow. It feels so. I could be wrong. but what is said doesn't seem to reflect the reality as I interpret it. Maybe I need to do more research in that area. Furthermore, you are more at threat because of gaps regarding technology. I've said this for a long time. I've said this first time I ever said it when I had a public platform was back in 2010. Said this the same way you know how to use one of those platforms like TikTok to show your life and all of that. The same way that you're a consumer of technology, you have to be able to be a producer, not of technology, but a producer of solutions using said technology. It baffles my mind, for example, to this day, that more businesses don't use bots, AI bots, which come standard. You can even use ChatGPT to code them, right? So that you can have WhatsApp auto respond in a human manner. You just pay 200 US a month, connect some APIs, which is, think of it as a funnel that connects to OpenAI, which owns ChatGPT, and have that be your admin assistant. Or better yet, not that I want your admin assistant to lose a job if you have one, but she can go on to do other things that help out with, or he, to help more with sales and marketing, following up with the customer, customizations, going into better products, all type of things. But Heather, I see your message. Thank you. I understand. So the thing that is going to widen now, once my videos comes back, I'll speak again. There you go. The thing that is very clear as a threat, probably the largest one, is an even further widening. Like there's people who are very hesitant to use AI, and you have to, like you have to. China, and my next article on Monday is going to speak to this directly. China flipped the game on its head. There's an AI arms race, and anytime there's an arms race, major innovations come about. You know, nuclear technology, which has helped in terms of powering homes in so-called first world countries or the global north countries. Aviation, you know, advances in that industry, in the industry I'm in now, came about because of wars and because of competing countries trying to get the best technology. The internet is a result of the Cold War between the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, and the United States. Anytime you see two countries going at it like this, the technology is going to be standard. So for the future, maybe you as small businesses in Barbados, especially if the owners or the principals are not of a certain age, may not agree with this, but it has to be a fact. The same way reading and writing at a very basic level is required, the ability to use Microsoft Excel, the ability to not write code, but to prompt generate. In other words, talk with AI in a way that's clear, could make a major difference in competition going forward. It would mean that a business in a very small country can operate as if it were globally more than ever. So it allows then for opportunities in e-commerce expansion, right? It allows for sustainable business practices as far as I'm concerned. But more importantly, using AI, or put it from this point of view, to compete going forward, the small business sector has to think more regionally niche. In other words, whatever you can do and have done well, find partnerships in the other countries that can help you do so. I still am bewildered at the fact that Bajans aren't running into Guyana, but yet tons of Jamaicans and Trinidadians are down there, and yet I can't convince Bajans who would have small businesses to spend some time, not necessarily money, finding connections down there to partner. Believe it or not, that helps you get into the Brazilian market. And if you need a Portuguese speaker, I can help. But the fact is that, you know, where the government is concerned right now is trying to minimize as much expenditure as possible while trying to, I'm not going to say grow, but stabilize its revenue. The government is looking for a profit. And Arabara used to say all the time, you know, a government that is making a profit, I'm going to loosely say it, making a profit is not one concerned with development. I'm not saying that this government isn't concerned with development, but you're in the middle of an IMF program. Even though it comes across friendlier and it's dressed like a pig in lipstick, the point being is that it has to do what it has to do. To move on quickly. So some particular pain points now to get down to the nitty gritty. This recent monthly income tax prepayment initiative. Now, simply, 2025 income year, this year, the government is expecting you to make prepayments. There's a formula based on the guidance note. I'm quite sure the SBA will provide that. It's a very simple formula. Effectively, if you made a profit last year, then they're going to assume that you're going to make a profit this year, and you're going to be taxed on that profit at the rate that you qualify for based on the size of your activity, and you divide that by 12. That gives you what your expected prepayment is. So I would advise every one of you to sit with your accountants and work that out as quickly as possible. There are a few exemptions, especially if you are registered as a registered small business. And this is the key thing, not or, and making under 2 million a year. So basically, if you are not charging VAT or you don't have to pay VAT, quote unquote, and you're a small business, then fine. You don't need to make these prepayments. But for those that don't qualify one way or another, that is some of the SBA members whose revenue is above 2 million a year, this is a cash flow issue. It is a cash flow issue. You probably didn't plan for it. You probably barely made a profit last year. You probably had some expansion plans with your cash. You probably are running tight in terms of your line of credit. You probably have a lot of adverse situations ahead of you in terms of cash flow, because effectively what government is doing is not impeding your profitability directly. It isn't, unless you plan on performing, because they have to get back the money if you make a loss. Question is when you will get back the money. So it's not necessarily impeding your profitability. It is, but not necessarily. The biggest issue is cash flow. When cash, which is very much a scarce resource for a lot of small businesses nowadays, when you would find the cash in order to make these prepayments. So you have to start thinking of the government as a monthly employee more than ever. If you didn't think of it before, you thought of the government as a consultant, and you paid them quarterly or half yearly. Effectively, right now, the government is an employee. Now, the reason for it, again, ties back to what I explained before, where the government is concerning itself more so with primary surpluses than ever before. And therefore, that is tied into its ability to be able to service its debts quickly and to pay for whatever. Now, what I don't have, I lifted this part right here from something in the central bank's report, but very, very, very quickly, what it is effectively saying is that the government, not for the first time, but definitely significantly so, was able to finance its operations not by debt, which is what most of us here, if we are adults over the age of 30, would have heard over the years, that government kept on borrowing to pay expenses. It may be a project or maybe to pay salaries. You know what I mean? That was under the last administration, heavily especially. And in the earlier parts of this administration, the same occurred in terms of government having to borrow or restructure debt in order to finance its operations. Corporate taxation, for the first time in a long way, as far as I'm concerned, paid for government expenditure. So they are in a position where they think, or it seems as though they think, well, no, we don't really have to borrow as much. The private sector is taking care of us. We don't want to increase the tax burden, but we need to probably close our gaps, get our debt down faster. It's the best way to do it. You know what? Let's make sure cash comes in quickly, as opposed to waiting and then having to find financing through a treasury bill or through a short-term bond to pay something that was coming due in a few months. Let's get the money up front, kind of like that. So they're basically taking how they view VAT, how they view a PAYE, and saying carte blanche for all corporations, this is how it's got to be. And it's going to be based on your past annual performance as you report it. Of course, no, the question repeats itself in a year. How many businesses would purposely try to run a loss? And it becomes a game of cat and mouse. I would hope that doesn't affect the small business sector, especially where, you get audits, and which is an increased burden. It affects not profitability, it affects to my mind, the efficiency of how that business is run. You have to dedicate resources to the audit, for example. So, it could become a burden, a regulatory burden long term, especially if businesses start marking losses or marking down profits just so that it could preserve cash flow going into the future. It becomes a game of cat and mouse. I wouldn't want that, but I understand and kind of support the notion that government is going, if I'm to be logical. I'm not speaking anything but professionally. Like, if it is that the corporate sector kept you afloat, you figure you could just get a little more cash flow out of them, not more taxes, but get the payments a little earlier than you used to. It could help eradicate that debt target, get that debt target below 100% of GDP. Then that's what you're doing. The issue again for small businesses is the refunds. So I have a feeling, a very well-informed feeling that, there may be a lobby to amend or to provide certain consideration with this initiative. All in all, you've got the issue in terms of the rising cost of doing business as VAT is removed, the VAT removal, sorry. Then, I didn't word this properly, but the VAT removal initiative comes to an end. We expect that electricity costs will climb, but given what I've seen from the central bank report, the climb shouldn't be high if the VAT is removed. It's going to be noticeable, and small businesses in general will want to pass on that cost. But again, because we don't know, given all the turmoil, the probable turmoil and wars that may happen, the price of oil is the stickler. You can expect that as that begins to inch up too quickly, we're going to have to feel the brunt of that in terms of our electricity costs. So removing the VAT at this point is one that says, all right, well, no, everybody else, you need to stay the course, to borrow a term, especially if the price of oil increases. Of course, I believe personally that inflation, as I mentioned earlier, the number that they're expecting going forward, sorry, video has to come back, right. The number that they're expecting going forward is a bare minimum. There's just too much geopolitical risk to safely say that, inflation will stay at those numbers. Because of the increased use or propagation of technology is the word I would want to use. Cybersecurity is a major issue. I mean, Massey, for instance, I really don't like how companies in the Caribbean, and to an extent, a big extent, how governments treat cybersecurity issues in the Caribbean. It feels like a pinch of gaslighting and a dash of ignorance being put into that formula. You have to be, in other words, totally transparent, because, as was the case recently where the immigration office and BRA were hacked, we still not fully appraised as to how much information truthfully left. I know they know, but maybe it's because it's out of our minds that none of us have told anything. But this thing is going to happen more often. I mean, the Chinese released DeepSeek the other day, and hackers went to town trying to hack it. Not yesterday, earlier this week, late last week, released the newest version of DeepSeek, which is a competitor to ChatGPT, and hackers from all over the world went crazy. And as computers get faster and there's more prevalence towards AI, there's going to be more hacking. So small businesses have to seriously invest in protecting the data, either storing it safely, locally, foreign ways. Like you can't just have a solution from Google and think everything is safe unless you don't mind your data being out there. And because of these data, sorry, camera froze again. Because of these data privacy acts, is very evident that, especially if you don't want to be sued by your foreign customers, that you need to get things, I don't know, you need to get your affairs in order. And I would say that the SBA, as part of its agenda for this year, is to start agitating insurance companies to start providing insurance in this area. I saw a few articles recently speaking of larger companies actually pushing towards insurance or having insurance solutions. So it must spread to small businesses, because I think small businesses will be the point of vulnerability. In other words, the easier people to hack going forward, and it can cause national issues. So, right. So just to finish up quickly, because time is running out. What I would say is, I mean, these are piecemeal and simple. You have to anticipate that there's a disruption to your cash flow because of the initiatives, especially with these prepayments and other risks to the economy. You have to support the SBA and others in terms of lobbying, especially if you view such policies to be harmful, or at least to bring awareness to government, because government tends to listen where there's noise. In terms of the technology adoption, like, it has to be from a revenue perspective, primary thing you're looking at. You gotta use the AI. You have to in some way use it, else you'll be left up to sea. And you're in a hyper-competitive environment. But more importantly, from a cybersecurity perspective, invest in that, in those facilities, invest in people that can help it, agitate for the insurance to help, because there are insurance policies that you can pay a premium for that can help cover you in case there's a major breach. It doesn't have to be local companies, but if you can find some, so be it. And last but not least, if you can find alternative finance and resources, please do so. I thank you. Everything else is self-evident, and I'm running out of time. Thank you for your time.
All right. So I have to turn my camera off for this session because you know, when you have the camera on, that tends to contribute as well to the bandwidth not being very stable. So just verify that you can hear me. And I'll begin this segment with the same point that I made at the introductory stage. Folks, this year I'm calling on small business to advocate the ensuring that we can, you know, mount the kind of lobbying effort that we need going forward. All right. I think this is worthy of repeat. Small businesses, small business persons on the call during this year, we need you to join us in improving and enhancing our advocacy going forward. We need you to be writing to your MPs, contacting them, sending emails, speaking up on a myriad of issues that are affecting the sector.
Actually, until she comes back, if anybody wants to ask me a question, I see a lot of them in the chat. A lot of them I can't answer. A lot of them I won't dare to answer. So I would need, if anybody wants to ask something, there's a lot of them I can't answer.
I kind of have a random question. So I'm working on a project where we're looking at using AI for not just data insights, but also for reporting in a journalistic way on the data. But I was wondering what your thought is on when it comes to data sharing, because what we're looking at is not to be like the owners of the data, but having like a collective. So collaborators within the region that would be interested in sharing their data. And it's not just, you know, looking at healthcare data, it's any kind of data in order to provide insights, because really and truly data is the way to go to make impact. So I was wondering if there was anyone that would be interested, or if you have any kind of like, more like a pick your brain than ask a question, any kind of list of like NGOs or anyone that would be interested, that have data sets that they'd be interested in sharing and becoming part of the collective.
Ooh.
Sorry. It's a mouthful and it's
No, no,
All
no.
right.
I was going to probably say something I would
Yeah.
disagree with, but Dr. Holt is
Okay.
back. I'll answer after.
Somebody, Jeremy, don't want me to for this during this year because the what I call a cash grab of government is affecting our small business community in a very, very challenging manner. So I'm gonna call for it, Jeremy, small business community to join us in this advocacy effort. So we have a few questions in the chat. Remember, I said at the very beginning, those who would have joined late quickly, place your questions in the chat. Jeremy, if you can help us to distill some of these points now.
Yeah, there was one that was asked that
Yeah.
I would think,
For the remaining time that we have.
Yeah, very quickly, what was asked is whether those finance and resources or that if you can find data from partners, NGOs that may have data that could help an initiative that digital data services, this young lady had asked about. I would tell her very, very simply that you're better off scraping if you can, scraping data. If you can, using the same AI, get ChatGPT to write crawlers, use those that open up browsers, because a lot of the services tend to block the non-browser crawlers. I don't know if that would make sense to you, but there's some that
yeah, I'm
right,
with you.
right. So use that and do that. I would tell you the easiest way to catch an NGO's attention is to sell data back to them, believe it or not. If you want to get the relationship with the NGO, see if you can grab data that they have trouble collecting, and then you can start from there as a sharing arrangement. You know, you share the data. Some people get the NGOs to pay them for it, but you share the data and assess for whatever it is that you're going after that is vital to your business. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah. We have a few Jeremy on
Yeah.
the actual prepayment regime, and I want to spend a few moments, additional moments on that, because this is the latest issue that is affecting the sector and will affect the sector. I'm going to ask my staff to place in the chat now the link for that policy note that was sent out by the BRA. Now, the SBA would have asked for this policy note in a briefing that we had last week, Friday. And this was sent out earlier this week, and we sent it to the membership. I believe it was just yesterday in our email blast. But if there's any member who didn't get a chance to read it, it is here in the chat. Please click the link now, and you'll have access to that guidance note from the BRA. But Jeremy, just a quick point, maybe further clarification, because the exemptions are for businesses that are approved small businesses and registered according to the act. So let's understand that that's the only group that is exempted, huh? So it's only those businesses that are approved small businesses and registered according to the act, which is that you earn less than $2 million in annual revenue and so on, but you must be an approved small business. So the fact is that every other business that is not approved, that is not an approved small business, this policy applies to. And that is therefore the majority of businesses. All right. So every business that is not an approved small business, this policy applies to. And I can tell you how many approved small businesses there are, but I'm not going to reveal it here, but I'll just say that there are less than 150 small businesses in this approved small businesses in this country. Less than 150 that are registered according to the act that are approved small businesses. That means that the majority, Jeremy, and colleagues on the call, the majority of firms, companies, because it applies to companies, not sole proprietors. So the majority of companies have to begin to comply with this regime from this month.
Correct.
Now that is significant in our view, and therefore this is why we have to mount our lobby. This what I call a cash grab. So government is working hard to get the debt down, the debt under 100% of GDP. But in so doing, you're going after the vulnerable business community, which is the small business sector, who don't have, Jeremy, the wherewithal to pass on increased costs to consumers, and their margins are already very, 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 very small. So I think that this particular policy initiative is going to have a further deleterious effect on the sector. Your thoughts?
You know, I mean, as I said, it's going to be a cash flow issue. Regardless, I mean, the profitability issue for me, just because of how accounting is, isn't the problem. Let me explain why I say this. Because there is a liability that you can carry for those prepayments, right? So from a profitability and a balance sheet perspective, it really doesn't matter as long, the key point is this, as long as the government refunds money in a timely manner. Timely manner meaning, like for me, you file once a year, then once you file and it's reviewed and whatnot, money is paid back out to you within a few months, a month or so. But if they don't drag it on like how they did for PAYE, then I don't see it being a major profitability issue. I see it being a cash flow issue, especially where no decisions, depending on how large the small business is, because we're speaking to small businesses here, approve or otherwise. You know, the problem would be where can they invest next? Because you, as you rightly said, margins can be tight depending on industry. So when margins are tight, there's always an incentive to invest to lower costs, invest in doing things faster, hire the right people if the case is. Even if it's more challenging to raise revenue, you try to lower costs by investing in efficiencies, right? So now the question is, you know, do I delay this investment so that I can meet this obligation because I was profitable last year? It can come to that depending on how small the business is. So I personally don't see it as a profitability issue. I would be disingenuous if I said so. I'm not saying I'm right, because somebody else could see it in a way that's truthful. But with my first glance, with me ruminating over it for the last 2 days, I really don't see a profitability issue. I see it impacting profitability if government pays back money, if the business makes less profit, you know, repays the company late, because now that cash flow issue now becomes a profitability issue. Your inefficiencies build up, costs climb as a result, and you're not getting any more revenue. Then I see that. So I see the profitability issue being delayed by a financial year at least, but the immediate concern is cash flow, in my opinion.
Agreed. I'm agreeing with you. It is a cash flow issue. And I mean, you made the point here is that a small business now has to add government as a part of its monthly bills.
As an employee,
So,
as an
so it
employee.
is a cash flow issue. And if you look at the guidance note is saying that you now have to go back and make the computations on your 2023, not 2024, your 2023 taxable income. You see, so this one I think is compounding, that is compounding all the other issues in the business environment. This one is very, very destructive and has that potential to be very, very devastating on the small firm. And therefore we have to make our voices known on this one. But while we look to wrap up, I'm not so sure if you took a look at Vadis's question about the junior stock exchange. This is a project that's been on the cards for some time. And Vadis is here asking what would be considerations regarding the junior stock exchange and businesses who might be interested in utilizing this as a method for long-term financing. Your thoughts?
Boy, I get a hard time even convincing the agents to invest in Goddards. So, like, all right, the initiative can come. I think it would take a while before you get investors in mass. In other words, I see it playing out two ways in the short term. Say the junior stock exchange was legislated and officiated and started running let's say summer, July. And that's 6 months, 5 to 6 months to appraise the agents as to the risk and the rewards. Most people would see it as risky because it's junior stock exchange, smaller businesses, shorter track records, a lot of probably compliance issues that they need to clean up. Well, then again, in order to get on these exchanges, you must be compliant generally. But the reputational risk is probably going to be the greatest issue, and maybe even profitability, right? So you're going to convince the agents who, honest to God, like for years keep telling me that there's nothing to invest in, but yet, there's a bunch of companies on the stock exchange. Some of them not worth your time. A few of them definitely worth your time from a dividends perspective, especially. And you got CARICOM companies nearby, and CARICOM citizens can invest in any CARICOM state, and the cost doesn't have to be astronomical or even prohibitive. So you've been saying this forever, and some people listen and they go and look and then say it's not for them, and the majority would prefer to join a Ponzi scheme. So for me, I think the issue isn't even the legislation. I think if you did it by July, most people wouldn't take advantage. And here's the problem. The companies that would list on a junior stock exchange are probably in more of a dire need for that financing than those that will list on the odd lots or the larger stock exchanges, like the Barbados Stock Exchange. So Jamaica's, for instance, took a while. And luckily, there wasn't a huge amount of listings once they had opened up their junior stock exchange. There wasn't a large set coming looking for funding. It was a few that took the risk, and they had just enough investors to come in and make the right investments. Money was made, and then it gave it some bit of what was the word? What's the word I'm looking for? It justified the investment in the eyes of a lot of people. Right. It gave incentive for other people to follow and other companies to follow. So I characteristically would say, don't mind my candor to mean that I don't think it is necessary. It is beyond necessary. I just think the timing and reality, the timing of it and the reality behind the investors matter a lot, or there's a lot of consideration to be done there. So if they push it, and I would love them to push it, because I was hearing about it since I was in my 20s and I'm 41 now. And I would love for that to happen. I think it would at least allow small businesses to do all right, this is going to sound bad, to skip the credit union. Because effectively what the junior stock exchange is what the credit union in Barbados should really be. Because a lot of the credit unions lend for personal investments, or to buy a home or a car. But the credit unions are the facility that can actually help small businesses if they're willing to take on the risk, or if the regulators allow them to take on the risk, which they don't. Right. So what the credit unions should be, in my mind, is what the junior stock exchange can be. So I think it is necessary. It's just timing and investment culture that is the issue for me.
Yeah. I see Hallam Hope is here saying, man, the stock exchange is dead. Hallam, I believe in the resurrection though, Hallam, so it can be resurrected.
But to address that real quick, he's not necessarily led if you're looking at returns on investment fund. But as I said, that's why I didn't look at let's say, capital appreciation. I didn't look at, say, the price of Goddard's, or Sagicor is no longer on it, but the price of banks or whoever, or with Bisco. I'm not looking at that. You don't invest in the Barbados Stock Exchange for anything more than dividends nowadays. That's the truth. And that's just the design of it. No, and you got to be realistic.
But you see, Jeremy, you're constantly making points that just really supports my view. My hypothesis really is that the regulatory regime in Barbados is not enabling to business. That is my hypothesis. And each time you make a point, you're supporting it, because even the point about the credit unions can do more, and they will want to do more. Wearing my credit union hat. It is the regulatory environment, the regulation, the law, the legislation does not allow credit unions to do a lot of the things that they want to do, and to venture into other areas of investment that they would want to. Okay, we have archaic legislation, and for eons, that has been the lobby now to government. We need modern legislation for the credit union sector to be able to even venture into the MSME market. So again, it goes back to that regulatory regime that I am convinced we need to work on. Here's Laurelyn's question back again on the prepayment. She's asking, well, what happens when companies are seeing declines in business activity where 2023 may have been a profitable year out of many less profitable before and after. So if it is that the prepayment regime starts, from this year, but you're supposed to look back at the taxable income from 2023, she's asking, what happens when after 2023 you've not been profitable?
Well, then it means that the 2024 consideration is to your benefit. But sadly, you see, here's the problem. I'm not sure if after this one, they're going to use the 2025 income year to make the prepayments. That isn't clear enough. Because I know you do it based on past performance, normally the year before. Right?
Correct.
So I
That's
don't
the
know if
thing. The guidance note, when you read it there, the guidance note says 2023. So I said, I'm not so sure if this is an error. We're going to contact them this today to find out, is this an error? Because the guidance note says 2023.
Correct.
Mhm. Okay. There was one other point, Jeremy, before we run off and conclude our session today. We know that Jamaica has done very well with their junior market. I mean, it has taken a long time, because we're looking on them and we're seeing the success of it. But they had a very long gestation period, that's the truth, before they were able to get a thriving junior market. But if we learn from them, I think we can avoid some of those teething and issues that they would have gone through earlier on. Yeah. But we definitely need to have a junior market here to help with the access to financing, especially, the equity solutions, the equity financing that is needed for the sector. But the point is being made again on the call. Why the focus on the approved small business when you can simply just go with the definition that is given in the act for small business, and that should be it. Why the focus on the approved small business? From where I sit, Jeremy, it is government's effort to try to bring in as many of these companies into the net as possible, but it's not working, because as I said, I'm not going to tell you the number, but we have less than 150 approved small businesses right now in the system, in the regime. So if this has been failing, why the persistent focus on it? Jeremy, your thoughts?
I really don't know. I honestly, the problem with politics in Barbados is that, and I had to start from that perspective, but maybe even the United States of America, is that when initiatives are discussed, they are discussed in isolation from I would say the entire fact. So again, I'll give a perfect example really quickly. How many of the small businesses on here were part of the GDP surveys when they're done? Like, have you ever had a call from the statistical service that asked how well you're doing? I know you're supposed to provide information to the government, no, but have you ever done anything of that sort? Like, you can give me a thumbs up or something like that to give me an idea. But here's the point that I'm making. Ideally, every bit of data that tends to be produced about the macroeconomy tends to isolate a significant part of or number of people and number of businesses. So when decisions are made based on the data fed by the BSE, and the BSE has resource issues, like you can't talk to everybody, but for me, there's not really a mix. So as a result, if they see the economy is growing and there's all indicators that there's more money to help government with its issues, then they're going to go that way, that route, if you get where I'm coming from. But so the thing has to be is that the small business sector has to view itself as a pseudo civil society. In other words, like most issues affecting civil society, this would be like persons who are in need of, like, underrepresented, the Rastafarian community, for example. There's other communities I don't want to misname, but anything that Marcia Brandon, basically Dr. Marcia Brandon, is connected to wholeheartedly. She and others, the government would do better in terms of having them at the seat of the table. Whereas when it comes to business, especially small business, that doesn't happen the way I would think, for example. So like the IMF, for instance, when they come around, they might talk to the SBA, but how many members, which would be a good representative sample, how many members are actually interviewed by the IMF to get an idea as to whether or how those policies truly affect them. You know, the SBA can give a aggregated idea, but some members may or may not be willing, based on interrelationships, to have those concerns echoed through the SBA. So my point being is like, a lot of when you see concerning policy, again, I'm not saying that it's right or wrong for this point, but if you see policy that's concerning, typically it means that you weren't included in the thought process to begin with.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, thanks much. And I can always count on Don Williams, our member, our resident accountant, to jump in and bring clarification. Thanks, Don. Don had put the point in the chat for us about the 2023 year. You're so right, because 2023 would have been completed in TAMIS already. 2024 is now being processed relative to the taxable income for that year. So you're right, Don. Thanks much. And thanks, Kathy. Kathy Daniel, you're correct. We don't have a voice at the level of the parliamentary team anymore. So we're not seeing the kind of focus on the small business sector. So we're going to wrap up now. We're out of time. We're having such a good discussion here, Jeremy. I know that we said 12 o'clock, but we're out of time. I'm going to ask the staff to put the link right now for the evaluation in the chat. But there's one question, Jeremy, that from Denise, that we didn't get a chance to weigh in on, and I would wish your thoughts why the officers put the link there to evaluation tool in the chat. Dennis is asking, how can we maintain economic momentum even with slower projected growth in 2025? What structural reforms or investments can be made to support long-term growth? Right? What are the risks of pursuing aggressive debt reduction in a period of slower economic growth? I mean, my view, Jeremy, is that government needs to be focusing on stimulating the productive sectors more so than this cash grab that we're seeing, and that's not happening. So what are your thoughts here to Denise's question?
I don't want to call it a cash grab, but again, I even if I have personal thoughts, I was engaged professionally, right? So based on the evidence, they're only doing what makes sense based on the fact that they believe the economy to be buoyant, based on paper, right? So logically, they're not doing anything that I was a little surprised that they wanted to do it, but I'm not saying that it's irrational. It may be incorrect, but it might not be, it's certainly not irrational, believe it or not. But that's why you need to inform them of why it's incorrect. But the question is about government in general or just small businesses making corrections? That's what I'm not clear on.
Oh, I interpreted Denise's question about government. Yeah.
Well, shoot, man. Look, Denise, no matter how we feel about it, the government is under a BERT program. It has to comply, or else it can run the risk of having more dire terms should it come up for more financing in the future, right? So the compliance with the BERT program is at least for them, the strategy that costs less long term, because it provides, let's say, means and access to financing. You know, it provides, I guess, credibility for future financing efforts for climate initiatives and all of that. So I think it is a case where the government knows that it is in a bind. The government knows that to lend too much support may lend itself to perceived inefficiencies, you know, turning blind eyes again, which is what the IMF has said over and over since 2018 is part of the problem. So if you're going to adopt the BERT program as your guide to success, you're going to close inefficiencies, which means that some segments of the economy may not like it, but long term, it allows the government to achieve certain objectives that are primary to them. Climate financing is one, for example. So as a lobbying group, you have to show how important you are to compare to those. So in other words, all right, you can be more efficient, but don't choke us because this is what we can bring to the table in terms of taxable revenue. If it is that the argument is that you don't have proof to show that you've made those contributions that matter, then it's difficult. But you do have something to stand on. They did say that corporate tax revenue basically financed government operations this year. Like that's been admitted by the central bank. So if you are paying taxes because I mean you might have made enough profit to do it, then there's the argument that you feel that this reversal could impede taxation. You can prove it. Then by all means, you show that collectively and government may have to make a change. But their argument is, well, then become a approved small business. And if then that's the case, there's less burden on you. So I actually don't know. That's a very good question. I don't know what the silver bullet or the magic bullet is, to be honest.
All right. Okay. I'm no economist, but I'm a very practical individual on the ground. Jeremy, I have a few thoughts on what the solutions could very well be. I understand, yes, we are in an IMF program. But you know that being in an IMF program pretends austerity, and that's what we're seeing. So despite you talking about all this growth in the economy, the folks on the proverbial ground, the persons in the community, the communities across this country, the vulnerable groups and so on, they're not feeling it. They're not feeling it. And yes, we understand at the macro level, you want to realize these surpluses and you want to bring the debt to GDP down. But I think going about this way of imposing greater taxation on the business community, I'm not so sure that that is the solution. I mean, economists will have their views, but I would recommend stimulating the productive sectors, get the productive sectors functioning on all cylinders. That should be, the solution and the focus. When you get the productive sectors growing, automatically they're going to contribute, to your tax intake. Yeah, but not trying to burden the small business sector in particular. You're impeding their cash flows. You put in, more restriction on their operations. I'm not so sure that is the way to go. The corporation tax that you referred to, the governor of the central bank mentioned in his report yesterday, was primarily from larger firms, larger companies.
There you go.
I would put my money there that they're primarily from larger companies.
But there is the issue.
Yeah.
That presents the issue in the lobby because maybe you didn't pay enough, or maybe you were. you see where the thinking is, right?
Yeah,
So,
but there's not. Yeah, the taxable income isn't there. You see, because you
Yep.
have to pay so much. You have to pay so much in fees. You have to pay so much in fees and other costs that you're not really making profit. So you don't have the taxable income that you can pay on in the first place. That's the issue. So you need to make them profitable, that they can contribute fairly to the process.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
All right. So, folks, we are out of time. Let me try my camera and see if, in the final few seconds that we have here, we can conclude and get back on camera with our session. Again, thank you so much for everyone who participated. Remember that the session is recorded. All of our sessions are recorded. And so you'll be able to access this in another day or two from SBA TV and our YouTube channel. You can watch it, listen in again, and view the presentation that Jeremy made during the session today. Wow, we've started off on a good note. Well, an hour and a half now because we're at 12:30. So we thank all of you who stayed on and really participated in the conversation. As I begun, I'll conclude. This is a year for enhanced lobbying, folks. and the association can't do it alone. We need every single one of you on the call to help us. Reach out to your MPs, send in comments to the press, write articles, call in the program, etc. But we need to up the ante and work together to improve the business environment within which the small business sector has to function in this country as we go forward. Yeah. So thank you once again, folks. Thank you for filling out the form. If you've not yet done so, you've not hit the link, please hit the link now and give us your feedback on today's session. Cybersecurity was mentioned. We finished off last year having Flo on the call, helping us to distill this issue around cybersecurity. This is going to be our focus in the next quarter, in the next few months in this quarter, because again, cybersecurity presents another existential threat to the small business sector and the small business community. So look, listen out for that. We want to invite you to participate in our efforts at helping our members to become more resilient in their technology infrastructure and the technology footprint as we go forward. So thank you once again, folks. Thank you for being with us, staying on the call for so long. Thank you, Jeremy. Always a pleasure engaging with you, listening to you. I feel like Paul, who sat at the feet of Gamaliel and was schooled back then in theology. I feel like that, Jeremy, every time I sit and listen to you.
Thank you for having me. It's always an absolute honor.
Yeah, thank you too. And thank you, members of the association, friends and colleagues all for sharing with us today. God bless you all. We'll see you on the next webinar. Look out for, as I said, the upcoming work that we'll be doing with Flo relative to cybersecurity and resilience building for your firms as we go into this year, 2025. God bless you all. See you next time. Bye-bye.